And I've been talking way too long, but in summary, if you want to see it at the end, put it in at the beginning, make sure it's in the contract, make sure it's what you want, and make sure that design builder is providing you with the information you need to assure compliance. Jeff and I always include a reference slide as our last slide moving forward, but we have an alternative contracting methods website. Jeff will probably mention it again before the day's over, but this is a collection of state DOT procedure manuals, state laws, example contracts, statutes, basically state's procedures for design build, and we have a separate site for CMGC. So also one for, what's the third one, Jeff? ATCs? ATCs. So if you're looking for resources from other state DOTs, this is an excellent place to go shopping. And with that, I only planned to go 3 hours this morning. I got started a little bit early, so I'm going to finish a little bit early, but does anyone have any questions or comments on anything I've said this morning? I know it's a lot to digest, and I know you'll probably see a lot of this moving forward as Tennessee evolves, but yes, sir.
For the 35 places in Minnesota, were there right-of-way utility, railroad, all that stuff in that project, or was it pretty much just replacing construction?
There were many utility issues, several right-of-way issues, although it was mostly built within existing right-of-way, but there was some widening as part of this project, some ramp reconfiguration. And the reason the team that was successful got one of the reasons. They proposed a geometric design improvement at one of the interchanges adjacent to the bridge that no other team looked at. And they were able to do it at their best price proposal. So MnDOT considered that highly in the evaluation. That quality factor, that 50% weight, they scored very high in that factor because of their technical solutions. But it was very important in their winning of that proposal.
It sounds like the draft RFP is a good idea, what you mentioned earlier. Do state agencies get some good feedback additionally when they do the draft RFP? Maybe deal with utilities, maybe CE, maybe the right-of-way, NEPA.
I think it varies from agency to agency in the amount of time that they're allowing for that draft RFP review process and the amount of time they're willing to invest in communication with the industry, that if they receive questions, they usually post it on their website, post answers, so everybody has the same information. So it can be a very fruitful process in identifying risk, mitigating risk, allocating risk, and coming up with contract provisions that meet the industry's expectations. And sometimes it results in a holy cow moment where the state says, industry can't provide a performance bond for $2 billion. We need to rethink our requirement, our state law that requires a 100% performance bond for this contract. Sometimes that happens. So yeah, sometimes it's very beneficial for the state to hear those types of comments. Other question?
Going back on the NEPA side of things, in terms of when you have a project that has a NEPA approval that's far in advance of even having a preliminary design or much less final design, at what point do states typically come back to federal highways for NEPA reevaluations? You know, we typically, in our normal development process, have like right-of-way field reviews and construction field reviews, and we also have right-of-way and construction reevaluations. Where does that fit in the design build process?
I'm going to plead, I'm not the expert on that particular subject, and I'm going to look to maybe Jeff or some division office folks about NEPA reevaluation, and if they've had any experiences that in other states, maybe?
I think I can answer that. Well, in Tennessee, when they have the final plan for right-of-way, we go back and reevaluate it if there's any changes in the slope line or if there's some right-of-way acquiring right-of-way or easement. And then when you have final construction plan, and we do another reevaluation, just like any other design bid bill. When you have your final right-of-way and final construction, we do reevaluation if we change anything. But if we didn't change anything from the NEPA, then we don't have to go back and reevaluate. Susanna, do you want to add? I mean, is that?
No, that's correct. It depends on whether or not we're going
So when we have the design builder here in Tennessee, what they do after they will prepare the right-of-way plan. So when we have right-of-way plans ready, we turn it for right-of-way just like any other design bid bill. And that time, if we change any right-of-way, any slope line, we come back and reevaluate it. Same thing with construction. They will have plans just like our construction plans. Won't be that much detail, but it will look like construction plans to us for our inspector and for our field too.
I do know that some states, and I wish I could name them, in their ATC contract provision, they notify all proposers that if they come in with an ATC that modifies the NEPA footprint or the NEPA alignment, and it's necessary to do a reevaluation, they'll have to consider that schedule risk as part of their proposal. So in a way, it discourages innovation to the point that it would change the NEPA assumptions and the NEPA decision, but at least it's there as an issue for industry to consider when they're developing their ATCs, that if it's that significant, it has probably less likelihood of being accepted. It's important to notify proposers of that possibility. Gerald?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of project you're talking about and how that particular state sets up its NEPA process in relation to the design build process. Because what you may have in some situations, it's a rural type project. Some states will clear out environmentally a corridor, okay? And it varies from project to project. And again, you have to know whether you're working type of an urban environment or a rural environment. So you clear that out environmentally. Now, with that being said, right behind that is right-of-way. So you give an entire corridor to the design-build team, and depending on the design-build proposals, they will try to optimize the alignment within that corridor. That's one type of scenario. The other type of scenario is if you're in a more urban type of environment, they may set up saying that 30% plans, i.e. plan and profile, this is what we expect. And these are the environmental limits and what you can and can't do in the proposal. They may allow the design build team, like you said, have an ATC off to the side and say, if you have any suggestions that you may want to do innovation, propose them. It's still up to the owner, the state DOT, to decide whether that ATC is going to be accepted or not.
You're right, we do the same. I mean, in the RFP, we have language saying if you change anything outside the NEPA document, it's your responsibility to go ahead and reevaluate it. So it won't be the TDOT's responsibility. So we have some language in the RFP telling them, this is the NEPA document, this is what you need to design with. If you change it or if you modify it, it's your responsibility to go back and reevaluate it.
Here, I'll talk about that a little bit more this afternoon, but another way to try to visualize it, because over the years I've been involved like 18 EISs, 5 record of decisions, hundreds of EAs, and thousands of CADXs. So dealing with resource agencies and dealing with environmental issues. So I'm very environmental sensitive, especially working up in Alaska over the years and then working out in Southern California. However, so a way as far, my comment to that question would be, for NEPA, you got to recognize you got to address direct, indirect, secondary, cumulative impacts. Hopefully everybody's heard those words before. So figure out where your footprint is for your project and think of it being in front of you with where's my direct, indirect, cumulative, secondary impacts. Based upon the NEPA approval, coordination with the resource agencies, that's your starting line in the sand on how you've categorized your impacts related to your scope and purpose and need for your project. So as the change orders, ATCs come in, et cetera, you need to go back to your starting point and see how those things have revised, overruns, underrun, a little more direct impact here, indirect here, and see if they're balancing out. Or you need to go also potentially include those resource agencies that you're taking a change of what was originally coordinated with them, because they'll come back at you if you come out or they go out there and find out that you slipped something under the rug and didn't tell them. And I suspect that's happened to some people. I know it happened to some of my projects. It's not pretty because they'll shut you down, they'll find you, they can actually, they've got guns and handcuffs. So you want to avoid that. So again, big picture wise, just start fresh, like design, bid, build what you're doing. You probably got all that kind of stuff established, but recognize with design build, you got to have a little more foresight that as things come in, you want to try to put a little more internal controls that as a contractor brings those, their ingenuity into play, you all have already put somewhat of a thought process into it on how it may reflect back with the related resource agencies, the impacts, and see what can work for you. But as far as federal highways, in most cases being the lead agency for the NEPA document, somewhere along the way, that connection's got to come back up for a formal reevaluation in most cases.
Just one last thing. Where that generally comes up is the NEPA document will generally have your gross type environmental impacts for permitting. We're going to impact X number of wetlands or what have you. So as the design builder is going through and trying to optimize his design, he needs to take in consideration, can I get a permit for the impacts on the wetlands? Because generally you will have the final wetland impacts that will have to be coordinated with the resource agencies as far as what the permit requirements are or not. But that should be kind of there should be some coordination going on during that thought process, going from say 30% design forward. There has to be some discussion going on as far as does this trigger a reevaluation or not.
And that reevaluation would come back through the department. And the re-coordination, so the reevaluation and the coordination with the agencies, the resource agencies would come back through the department and not through the designer or the contractor.